Good morning, everyone, and my sincere apologies for the technical difficulties that we've experienced in making this webinar happen this morning. We've currently got about a third of the people we're expecting, so we're expecting more people to join in as we go. And if that doesn't work, we're very happy to run the webinar again. So let me get back to the script. Welcome to this webinar, providing an update on the commissioning work currently being undertaken by the Department of Communities. My name is Karen Irwin and I thank you for joining us here today. I'm the Assistant Director General of Strategy and Partnerships, and myself, along with Michael Cravola, the Chief Financial Officer, are the co-sponsors of this very important project. Before we begin today's proceedings, I would like to respectfully acknowledge the Whadjuk Noongar people and pay my respects to the traditional custodians of the land that we're meeting on today. I want to recognise continuing connection to land, to family and community, and I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. We're joining you today from beautiful Wallila. The objectives for today's session are to introduce and provide an overview of Communities' commissioning approach, including the agency commissioning plan. We will have a presentation from each of the 4 priority areas on how that approach will be applied. And those 4 areas are prevention of family and domestic violence, out-of-home care, homelessness, and the child sexual abuse therapeutic services. I acknowledge that we have a lot of information to provide you in a short period of time and that we were late in starting. We want to talk with you, we want to engage with you. This is the first of many such opportunities. We will have an opportunity for questions and answers at the end, and we will answer all of the questions. If we can't get to all of them today, we will publish answers. We will also make available, both on a website and today, email addresses for the leads. So if your question is not one you want to share, you can ask people individually. I say again, we do want to engage with you, and this is the first of many of these types of opportunities. Having set the scene, it is now my pleasure to welcome the Director General of the Department of Communities, Mr. Mike Rowe, to say a few words and to open today's proceedings.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much, Karen. It's wonderful to be with you. And again, I join Karen in my apologies for our slight hiccup. And just to reassure you that this is the start of a journey, there'll be lots of opportunity for engagement. If we need to run this again, we will. And as Karen said, there's plenty of opportunity for Q&A, both today and ongoing. So please bear with us. We need you for this journey. I'd also like to join Karen in acknowledging the traditional owners of the beautiful land of which I'm broadcasting from today, the Whadjuk Noongar Boodja, and I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. From where I'm sitting in one of my offices in East Perth, I can see the beautiful Derbil Yarragon in the building in the distance on a magnificent spring day here in Perth. So it's good to be alive in Perth today. I'd also like today to acknowledge that really our shared purpose with the stakeholders that we're meeting with today is around providing effective and appropriate services to men, women, children and families who through no fault of their own require our support to keep them safe and well. So as the relatively new Director General here at Communities, I continue to be impressed by the important work that we and the sector do to deliver services to our most vulnerable. We are very committed to delivering better outcomes for children, young people, their families and communities, as I know you are as well. And we also know that we can't do it alone and that our partners in the community services and particularly the ACCO sectors are integral to achieving that commitment. So it probably doesn't surprise you that each financial year Communities provides around $1.3 billion in contracts, grants and subsidies for the community services sector across a number of service streams. And as you're all very aware, the way we deliver and contract services have been driven by a number of reforms, including the ones that I'll list now. So All Paths Lead to Home, Western Australia's 10-year strategy on homelessness 2020 to 2030. Path to Safety, Western Australia's strategy to reduce family and domestic violence 2020 to 2030. The National Agreement on Closing the Gap 2020. The final report of the Royal Commission into Institutional Responses to Child Sexual Abuse, Building a Better Future, Out-of-Home Care Reform in Western Australia, as well as the Out-of-Home Care Reform Roadmap 2019 to 2023, and the development of the State Commissioning Strategy for Community Services. So there will be a test on this at the end of this presentation. There won't be. But there is a lot of reform work that's ongoing. It really does inform our approach to commissioning going forward. I'm also very well aware that at various times over the past few years, you provided your expertise and advice on how we can improve services to our clients, as well as how we, as an agency, can improve our services and relationships with our contracted services. This has included responding to consultations, participating in reference groups, and many other formal and informal mechanisms to seek input. Many of you have also recently provided feedback to the Department of Finance on their state commissioning strategy for community services discussion paper. That strategy aims to provide a holistic and sustainable approach to the commissioning and delivery of community services and will support greater cohesion between government, service providers, peak bodies and consumer advocates. So I really wanted to assure you all today that we're absolutely going to build on the information and expertise that you have provided to us previously and move forward to develop solutions to address the reforms I mentioned earlier and ultimately support better outcomes for some of the most vulnerable Western Australians. I've heard the message very loud and clear that people have been talking to us for a long time about these issues, and we want to start from that position. We don't want to revisit ground that we've already covered many times before. I'm really keen to see how we can work better across agencies to support better outcomes for our clients. That's why I've invited staff from the Department of the Premier and Cabinet, Treasury, Finance and the Mental Health Commission to attend today's session. In addition to this, I've asked my staff to convene a cross-agency working group to work on how we can design services and build on the collective impact agencies such as Department of Health, the WA Police, Justice, Education and others can have to deliver better outcomes for our clients. And I guess just talking to the Directors General of those respective agencies, we're absolutely committed to working together in this space to make sure that this process is effective and our investment is targeted and purposeful and mutually reinforcing. So further to my correspondence of the 30th of July 2021, Communities is taking a very coordinated approach to commissioning for our services. While the overarching plan is to introduce commissioning for all services, as Karen said, the initial focus is on 4 key priority areas, and they will be discussed today: homelessness, family and domestic violence, out-of-home care, and child sexual abuse therapeutic services. So these priority areas are constrained by the timeframes necessary to ensure new contracts are in place to provide these critical services to the community prior to the existing ones expiring in 2022. Many of these services and contracts have not been amended for many years to incorporate more up-to-date contracting approaches, and I know that that's been a frustration for many of you. Much more work is required over the next 5 years to bring the lived experience point of view into service design to ensure services are culturally safe for all Western Australians and to meet closing the gap targets by increasing ACCO participation. Karen has introduced herself, our Assistant Director General of Strategy and Partnerships, and Michael Cravola, who's sitting next to her, our Chief Financial Officer, are co-sponsors on this important project at my invitation. And our objectives for this project are several. We want to coordinate stakeholder engagement and consultation. We want to ensure consistent messaging about our approach as an agency, including principles and links to other work of the department. We want to move towards outcome-based contracting, and we want to develop timelines and milestones for the engagement, co-design, procurement and contracting of these services. Karen, Michael and their teams will provide further detail about the project and, more importantly, how you can all participate to shape the future of commissioning for communities. Unfortunately, I'm unable to stay for the entire webinar. It is Budget Estimates Week. However, I do hope that you will find this information useful. I do thank you most sincerely for your ongoing commitment to children, young people, their families and communities, and for your work with us as an organisation in driving these important reforms forward and seeing them land. And as I said before, I would encourage you to take the opportunity to ask questions today. If we're not able to answer the questions, we will take them on notice and come back to you, and we will provide you with the details, as Karen said, of the individual officers that you can contact to get your questions answered. And just to reassure you again, this is the very beginning of a process. There's plenty of opportunity for engagement going forward. With that, Karen, I'm handing it back to you. Thank you very much for the opportunity to be with you this morning, and I wish you all the very best for this webinar. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Mike. That's great. What I'm going to do today is I'm going to chair the session and move through the presenters, and also facilitate the question and answer session at the end. So if you want to type your questions in now, we do have people in the room who are keeping a record of those, and we will get to them at the end of the presentation. It's now my great pleasure to introduce Michael Cravola, who's the Chief Financial Officer in the Department of Communities and the co-sponsor on this project. Mac and Elaine will talk about the Communities Commissioning approach and the development of the agency commissioning plan.
Great, thanks for that, Karen. Good morning, and thank you all for joining us as we present an exciting step in our journey towards commissioning community services in Western Australia. The Director-General has shared some of his vision, and I'd like to take a few minutes to add a few more pieces to the puzzle. We've heard the Director-General reinforce the idea that we need to bring a sustained funding model to the service provision going forward. And as you're aware, the community is the lead agency for human and community services in WA. And is therefore responsible for some of the most complex and enduring challenges. So as both a provider and a funder of these services, the way in which we fulfil our commissioning role has a direct impact on the focus and the quality of the services for those that need them most. Commissioning considers the entire system within which services are delivered, considering the strategic intentions for the sector or the system, right through service design, through to procurement and through contract management activities, and ultimately evaluating whether we've got what we paid for and delivered a better service to our clients in need. Adopting and commissioning means big changes, not only to the services we deliver, but also to the way we work together. Commissioning is an approach that is based primarily on strong collaborative relationships that endure over time as we work towards a common objective, mainly an evolving system that supports our customers in need. In the past, communities worked mainly on new initiatives and services to commission services. We've worked with the sector, we've worked with peak bodies, we've worked with ACCOs and community representatives and those with lived experiences to define what service outcomes and design new service models to help people in need and to address local need and work in local contexts. Most recently, we have done this commissioning work in relation to the FTV hubs and the new refuges in Peel and Kwinana. Now we are moving on from these early processes to introduce commissioning to all of our existing services and recognising that that change in itself will take time. By working together, we can deliver what we want, which is a place-based, culturally safe, person-centric services that meet the local needs of Western Australians. I'd now like to introduce you to Elaine Patterson, Executive Director Contracting, who is leading our first agency commissioning plan, which sets out how we'll make this transition.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks very much for joining us this morning. And I've just realised I've touched the keyboard. I'm just not, there we go. Now hit the right button. I just want to kind of talk through some more of the practical details, if that's okay, about how we're going to move forward in terms of commissioning. Now, I'm sure most of you will all have seen that diagram that's on this, you should have seen now on the screen, but that is the diagram that's used on the discussion paper for the state commissioning strategy. And the idea that it kind of explains is that commissioning is a really iterative, integrated approach. It's not purely procurement, and I know there's been a lot of discussion in the past what do you mean by commissioning, so I thought it'd be useful just to kind of reinforce, but what we're really trying to do is look at how do you get better outcomes for people. That's why people are at the centre of that diagram. Service users and community are really the key, so that we can deliver better outcomes for people that really need services. So the idea is that we will start, as Michael said, you start talking about your identifying what your high level needs are, you talk about what your commissioning intentions are, how do you then look at your service design, and that's when it's going to be really, really crucial that we bring people along with us and we have a much more partnership approach to how we do that. And that includes getting the voice of lived experience included in that, because it's all about, as I said, good outcomes for people. And it's only at that point then you start talking about, do you actually do procurement? What does that procurement need? And then you talk about how you manage and monitor, and then you feed back into what the view is and what kind of services you need, and you keep doing that as a continuous process. So though we're talking about developing an agency commissioning plan, the plan won't be a standalone document that will never be updated. As Mike Groh said, this is really the start of the process. We may have done some commissioning work for new services, but traditionally government haven't really done that for services that have been ongoing. And I know that's particularly true in communities where there's a lot of contracts that have been rolled over for quite a few years. So it's a bit about how do we start taking a commissioning approach to those services. And just to kind of fill you in a bit about where we are on the journey. So we've looked at doing a draft agency commissioning plan, and we fed that into the central government agencies and the state commissioning strategy discussion paper. Based on some feedback from that and from the independent panel who reviewed our draft plan, we'll refine that, and then we'll have a state commissioning strategy later this year. We'll then again next year look at what our plan says, and we'll be updating it and reviewing it, and we'll be doing that as a continuous process over the next few years. So as I say, it's not a standalone what happens once and then we move on. This is going to be an approach to how we take forward work in the future. So when we talk about commissioning approach, what do we mean? I think there's some key underlying principles that we need to talk about. And again, I've mentioned it's really about building collaborative partnerships. It's not people at a kind of head office deciding what are the most appropriate services for people. It's about working together as a sector and with service users to figure out what is the kind of best services that we can deliver and how do we do that in more innovative ways than we have in the past. So I'm trying to embed that as a kind of consistent approach for all of our services, so not just for the new services, but for all services that we commission. And making sure that's grounded in outcomes for people and how do we take that forward, how do we measure it. So there's a real key piece of work about how we will do that, and that's going to happen, I think, across government as well. How do we do services that are much more about place-based services? So they need to be person-centric, but also look at where the services are being delivered and what's most appropriate there. So it's not going to be a one-size-fits-all cookie cutter approach. So how do we move to that? So there is a whole piece of work, as I said, it's not something that's going to happen really quickly. It's how do we do that over a period of time? And there may be ideas if we do some pilots, we do some, how does that work there, and then move that out to other services or other places. Absolutely have to look about how we prioritise Aboriginal people and organisations in the planning and design of the services that we deliver. And certainly I'll talk later about the closing the gap targets that we need to meet. And again, the whole shift in the focus from sort of crisis acute care, how do we do that to much more early intervention prevention, which I know is much easier said than done. But we want to have that as one of the principles and guiding things that we look at when we're thinking of services in the future. And to feed into that continuous kind of cycle of commissioning, we need to look about how we monitor, evaluate and review services. But again, not necessarily in a very bureaucratic way. So I think sometimes we have been very bureaucratic how we do things. And I know under the DCSP policy, there's some clear guidance about how we reduce the admin burden. So that's one of the key things, one of the key initiatives we want to look at. So as I said, we'll be looking to release the agency commissioning plan in the next little while, and that will then we'll start moving on to do how do we do some consultation about how we do commissioning. We're looking about setting up a group as the partners on the Communities Partnership Roundtable. We'll set up a working group from that group and start to have some discussions about how we will take this kind of work forward. And some of the key things we'll look at, as I said, closing the gap targets, federal and state government priorities. So we need to look about how we'll do that for services moving forward. Again, how do we incorporate the voice of lived experience into the kind of service design, building that kind of innovation and continuous improvement into services, and reducing the admin burden. So there's some of the top things that we really want to do in the next few years. And there's a bit about what steps can we take in the meantime. So we might not be able to come up with a perfect solution right away. So it will be like, how do we work together to get the best we can just now, recognising it might not be perfect, but then in further years we'll keep improving that. So as I say, we're kind of whole continuous improvement cycle that we'll be working through. And as we'll probably have to ask you to bear with us for a little while as we work through that. We won't get everything right initially, but the intention is we're absolutely committed to this, and we'll be working with you to get your feedback and input for how we do it. There's 4 priority areas that's been mentioned already, but I also wanted to mention there may be some people who are listening today who also have some contracts that are up within the next year. So there's about 75 other contracts apart from the 4 priority areas. We are very aware of that. We will be working with you through those contracts as well. So please don't think that you're being ignored. So that's all from me. So we'll hand back to Karen.
Thanks very much, Elaine, and to Mac for that. What we're going to do now is each of the project leads is going to run through and provide a brief overview of their area. I'm going to introduce all 4 and then it's going to run back to back, and that's how we're going to gain a bit of time back so we've got some more time for questions. So the next speakers will be Karen Webb, who's the Director of the Family and Domestic Violence Unit, Mark Burgess, who's the Caretaker of the Specialist Child Protection Unit, Chad Stewart, who's the Executive Director of Strategy, and Nicole Leggett, who's the General Manager in the Royal Commission into Institutional Responses to Child Sexual Abuse implementation team. Over to Karen.
Thank you. So the Path to Safety Australia, which is Western Australia's strategy to reduce family and domestic violence, has set a clear vision for Western Australians to live free from family and domestic violence. And that's through guiding a whole of community response to FDV. One of the ways that we're seeking to achieve this goal of reducing family and domestic violence in our state is through creating and strengthening an integrated family and domestic violence service system that is easy to navigate and provides timely and responsive services. So the Communities Agency Commissioning Plan offers us an opportunity to start working towards this goal. The contracts for all recurrent funded family and domestic violence services in Western Australia are due to expire on the 30th of June 2022. This represents a unique opportunity to ensure services align to the path to safety. It also allows us to build on what we've already heard through other consultation and co-design workshops. And it provides an opportunity to build on innovative practice and test some flexibility in service delivery. So that commissioning plan over the life of contracts. So we're going to work through and I guess work with everyone around a commissioning plan over the life of the contracts and provide an opportunity to work together. The roadmap it will be developed in partnership with the sector. So what that will look like is we'll define some service outcomes, including indicators of successes and outcomes, and those outcomes must align to closing the gap. And those targets are 12 and 13. We want to, like I've said, we want to strengthen an integrated FDV service system that is easy to navigate. We wanted to create a blueprint for an ideal state of what that service system might look like and how it might be able to work in that integrated way. We want to make recommendations about service models to inform immediate procurement processes. We want to make recommendations about supporting an increase in the market share for Aboriginal community controlled organisations. We want to make recommendations for streamlining contracts, develop a family domestic violence capability requirement for allied funded services, and include a plan for strategic asset management. So the investment that we have in FDV services right now is 27.2 million in accommodation services, 2.9 million in outreach services, including Safe at Home, 2.57 million in coordinated response services, which are part of the family and domestic violence response teams, which many of you will know is a partnership between communities, police and the sector. 2.8 million in responses to perpetrators, 4.4 million in counselling and advocacy services, and 767,000 in community services, including counselling. Further investment is from the government is a 90 million in investments between 2021 and 24, and that's 30.2 million with the National Partnership Agreement, 60 million in our election commitments. So some other considerations in the work that we'll be doing is working with our partners and peaks around some service standards, consider some of the impact on short-term funding through other arrangements, and also consider some asset infrastructure and the condition of those assets. One of the really important parts of this process is for us to build on what we've already heard through several different processes. So many of you will have contributed to the co-design of the Kalgoorlie and the Mirrabooka one-stop hubs, the co-design with the Kwinana and therapeutic Peel refuges, some of the sector and community engagement that was conducted extensively to inform the path to safety, the recent development of the ACO strategy, and other sector and community engagement that's being conducted currently to inform the Aboriginal Family Safety Strategy. So in addition to those, we also have information from regular service reports, regular contact with our peaks, and regular service reviews that we already have in place at the moment. And importantly, we hear from services through our work on a daily basis around what is happening out there in the sector and how we're working together. Our proposed approach is to hold a couple of design labs. So the details are on the screen now. So on October 14, you'll be invited to participate in a design lab to create that blueprint for how we want our integrated system to look. And so in that time that we want to hear from the sector and the people with lived experience to inform what that system needs to look like. We want to understand and discuss and develop some solutions around some of the enablers and some of the barriers and what those opportunities exist. We'd like to really work on creating methods for creating consistency across our service provision. And then we'll come back together on the 25th of October to start developing an outcomes framework. And so that will include moving towards an outcomes framework, what needs to happen in that space, how we will then report on an outcomes framework. But that outcomes framework needs to be trauma-informed, domestic violence-informed, culturally safe and responsive and person-driven. We want to understand with you how to streamline our contracts and enhance service flexibility. And we also want to understand ways of increasing Aboriginal community-controlled organisation leadership and participation. We're working really closely with the sector peeps, and more information about these workshops and design labs will be provided soon.
Thanks, Karen, and good morning, everyone. So firstly, I'd just like to acknowledge the work of the Independent Reference Group for out-of-home care in the space of, in the last couple of years in particular, in getting us to a point on which we are going to use as the foundation from which we are building the commissioning of these services on. That has been done in conjunction with the sector and with the Department of Community staff. And we're not going to lose that work. We want, as I said, we want to use that as the foundation from which we build upon this next phase. And I'd particularly like to acknowledge the work of the co-chairs of Maria Harries and Dawn Bessarab, and also the three subgroup chairs of Barbara Henry, Elise Jorgensen and Jennifer Hannon in getting us to the point that we're at the moment. And as I said, building upon that great work that has already been done in conjunction with the sector. The objectives have not changed, and for those of you in the out-of-home care sector, this slide should not be new to you, because this is ideally the system and the objectives that we want to aim and strive towards. We want to have an out-of-home care system that is needs-driven, and looking at that being used through the use of the needs assessment tool and the CASC. We want to look at those opportunities for early reunification, which will obviously provide the greatest stability for children when they're entering care. Of course, wherever possible, having siblings remain together and having a system that really supports the placement of siblings together. Cultural connection, with 57% of Aboriginal children being Aboriginal children in care. The importance of cultural connection cannot be said enough. And that's connection with family, with culture, with country and with community. We want a system that is preparing our children and young people to leave care with the supports required to give them every opportunity to live healthy, stable and productive lives, and build upon those community strengths that we have and we know have been in existence, and particularly in our regional areas too. We're looking at a flexible system that responds to the needs of the child, and that'll come through some of the service models that we will look at working with the sector on. And of course, being Aboriginal led in the child protection and the service system design that we do. And ultimately, one of the last objectives will be around improved accountability. And as many of you will know, this is a significant recommendation out of the Royal Commission into institutionalised child sexual abuse. The out-of-home care system, and I know this is a very busy slide, but to surmise it, it's about the child being at the centre of everything that we do.
It's about the representation of those objectives that I've just walked through on the previous slide, and ultimately providing the stability and connection for the child through family, community and culture. I want to look at a system that really has minimal disruption, keeps siblings together and matches children with appropriate placements. Again, this won't be new for those in the out-of-home care sector. Significant work was done with the Independent Reference Group and Department of Community staff in proposing some of these, and we will look to refine and go back and discuss these with the stakeholders during our design labs, which I'll get to in a minute. Ultimately, those 4 models are around the temporary care homes, which is around the 3-month care arrangement for children entering care, to really look at stabilising children in their local district or their local community, allowing them to maintain those connections with family, with community, with culture, with school, which we know is a very important part for our children and young people. The community-based care, so a community-based foster care model, which will be located around the state. The group foster care, which is similar to the family group homes, which we currently have as part of our suite of services in out-of-home care, with work looking to be undertaken to address the implications of the industrial relations review report that was released last year. And then finally, complex care, which is really looking at those niche care arrangements for children with more complex needs and how we can create and support agencies to deliver placements for those children with some of our most complex needs. So for us, the next steps, Dr. Stefan Lund, who many in the sector will know of and will have met, has been engaged to help facilitate 3 sessions, the first of which is the 13th of October, followed by the 27th of October and the 10th of November. Those we will start with looking at those service models and the funding, and it will include people with lived experience in those design labs, and that includes young people, carers, and representations from family as well. And significantly, the importance of the inclusion of our Aboriginal community controlled organisations within those sessions too. Not only in the recommissioning, but in the longer term outcomes for the out-of-home care system. And we will look to develop a blueprint for commissioning services as part of that process, in line with the current service agreements, which end on the 31st of December next year.
Kaya, just want to start relatively new back to the Department of Community, so I just want to give a bit of background about me. Acting Director within the strategy area. Homelessness is one of the key portfolios in my area, and in terms of my background, I've spent half my career in government and the other half in non-for-profits and ACCOs, so I do have appreciation of both sides of the fence. And when it comes to your side of the fence, as with many of my colleagues who worked in the not-for-profit sector as well, I do have a real appreciation of some of the barriers of delivering a high quality service, but being mindful of some of the impediments around reporting burden, being funded for activity and not outcomes, and also some of those difficult conversations you may have to have in March, April each year when you're not quite sure of the funding post-June. So just to give you a bit of context, we are conscious of where you're sitting, and many of us have had experiences on both sides of the fence. You'll be aware that there has been a significant change of personnel and change of leadership, but just wanted to reiterate the views of our Director General and also Karen, that we are absolutely committed to the All Paths Lead at Home homelessness strategy, and we're very committed to moving towards a commissioning service base that is outcomes focused, person centred and place based. Not as easy as we've alluded to, but they are the things that we are very focused on moving forward. One of the advantages for us, as opposed to some of the other streams, is that in the homelessness space, we are working off of a significant body of work that's been completed earlier this year. So last year there was a roadmap document that looked at mapping the homelessness system, and that was done by Dr. Gay McKenzie, who many of you will know from the sector. And that roadmap really pointed at the direction we need to focus on to get to that point where our services are outcomes-based, place-based, and client-centred, sorry. We have also had the opportunity to engage Justine Collier, who's known to many of you in the sector, who's come on the last few months as well to help us shape our direction and to ensure that we're doing this in partnership with the services. We understand this has taken a bit longer than we would have liked, as well as the sector, but we're careful that we want to get this right. In terms of the actual approach, the roadmap proposed two discrete pieces of work. One was actually focusing on a Southwest trial. And this is an innovative approach where the services in the Southwest can come together over the next 2 years to really look at how they can move towards that outcomes-based, place-based and person-centred approach to commissioning. So what we're proposing is that those services for the next 2 years will be working in an innovative model, and there is a discrete project and a discrete project team that we're pursuing on the Southwest trial. For the remainder of the state, we understand this may be frustrating for some of the other services across the rest of the state because we are looking to extend the services of those contracts for another 2 years. But we want to give assurances that with the pilot, we want to make sure that it's easy to apply the lessons and the outcomes of that pilot to the broader homelessness sector across the state. And we'll be very keen to intersect back with the broader sector over the next 2 years to make sure that that is happening in as much as possible in real time. For the remainder of the state, we haven't moved away from wanting to streamline services. Obviously, very conscious of reporting burden, very conscious of trying to move towards a better service base for those services over the next 2 years. And we will do what we can practically over the next few weeks, engaging with services to see what practicable changes we can make to contracts for the next 2 years. We've talked about design labs, which is similar to the other streams. The Southwest will have 2 discrete design labs, but there'll be a broader range of consultations that will happen in the Southwest. We've listened to the sector in terms of some of the key dates, and so we've moved a couple of the dates for the Southwest, and we're keen to get feedback from the rest of the state around the All of State workshop that we'll be holding on 4th of November. That won't be the only consultation to be had with service providers. As I said, there'll be one-on-one consultations with service providers across the state, but that will be a time to bring everyone together to look at what's been happening in the Southwest and to see what some of those practical changes we can make to contracts are for the next 2 years for all the services outside of the Southwest. It's obviously, there's a lot of benefits to this approach. There's obviously a lot of challenges. In the Southwest alone, how services work together, how services decide which services should be funded, which services should be delivered by whom. And also, how do we support existing services but build the capacity of Aboriginal community controlled organisations to come into the space, which is a key focus as Elaine articulated in one of our commitments under Closing the Gap. Just in terms of next steps, we're currently underway with our phase 1 planning. As I said, we've got the 2 pilots, the design labs in the Southwest, and we'll be moving towards the November workshop. These won't be the sum total workshops. Moving into next year, we'll be very keen to reach back out with the sector as a whole to look through how we move to that future state where we are looking at place-based, person-centred, outcomes-focused commissioning.
Thank you, Chair. So I am the last project lead to present today, so we'll be able to get to your questions fairly shortly. As many of you would know, the Department of Communities is the lead agency responsible for implementation of around 104 recommendations arising from the Royal Commission into institutional responses to child sexual abuse. A great number of those recommendations relate to our therapeutic services that we offer victims and survivors. They go to how we offer and design advocacy services, support services, therapeutic intervention, and also particularly how we improve our capacity and capability to respond to harmful sexual behaviours. In Western Australia at the moment, sorry, I'll skim down, we have 13 child sexual abuse therapeutic services and 2 Indigenous healing services. And over the course of this year, we have actually been working with all of those providers to offer them new contracts or working towards new contracts expiring in 2024 with 2 one-year extension options. So we are a little bit the outlier in this process, but the reason why we're part of this process is because there is some very important work to do in this space. So like the others, we'll be working towards a commissioning plan that speaks to some of the reforms that we want to see in this space, both to align to what we are responsible for delivering under the Royal Commission, but also for addressing some of the issues that we have heard from services about their current contract arrangements. So what we have heard from services is that the service models that they're currently contracted for are out of date, and many are not fit for purpose for the communities that they're serving, and maybe aren't always a great reflection of the services that they're currently offering because they are so out of date. We know that there are sustainability concerns as to the amount of money that these services receive. We have issues around unmet need, but then on the other hand, we also have some issues around the service offering in community perhaps not exactly meeting the need that is there. And we know that there's a lot of opportunity in this space to strengthen the connection between these services and some of the allied and broader services and systems that sit around them, like the Department of Communities, Health, Police and Education. So what we are proposing is that the commissioning plan for child sexual abuse therapeutic services will set out a blueprint to essentially identify how we're going to address some of these concerns, working towards the next contracting cycle for these services. And I suppose just as a bit of a summary, we are proposing that that would include evidence-based fit-for-purpose service models, outcomes-based contracts, improving capacity and capability to address harmful sexual behaviours, working towards ensuring that our services are culturally informed and culturally secure, which would also include looking at how we increase market share for Aboriginal community-controlled organisations in this space, and looking at the connection, as I've said, between these services and the broader system that they're sitting in. Because we do have longer term contracts in place, we have a little bit of a luxury of time in this space. So our design work will occur over a 12-month process, or 12-month period, I should say. We have just concluded one-to-one meetings with all of the service providers, essentially starting that discussion around what are the key challenges and opportunities that are currently in this space that we want to be considerate of in our commissioning plan. And we'll be commencing design workshops in October in step with the other priority service streams. Those co-design workshops will speak to all of those issues that I've just summarised, but essentially we'll be looking at redesigning our service and community outcomes. We'll be looking at our service models. And I suppose in that space, we'll be looking at what are the fundamentals that are the same for all services, but then how do we build in the flexibility that we need and want to be able to meet community need. In that space, we'll also be looking at the infrastructure that sits with those services to promote connection with the broader service systems, and we'll run a parallel process of assessing need and demand. And that will go some way to making arguments around increasing the funding share for these services to address the sustainability issues. So our design lab in October will be the first of many that occur over the next 12 months. So what we really wanted to do in this initial meeting was to speak to services about how we essentially proceed. So we'll start talking about the method for developing the commissioning plan. We'll confirm the key issues that I've summarised as to what we've heard from services, but to make sure that we've got the scope of work correct. We'll talk through the key strengths that we can build on in this space, and we'll probably also start talking about designing our service and community outcomes. We also are very lucky in this space to be able to work alongside the WA Centre for the Pursuit of Excellence in Responding to Child Abuse and Neglect. So they will be a key informer to this process, and they'll be able to support our development of a commissioning plan in a number of ways, including working with us to help establish the evidence base, particularly around our service models, but also unmet need and demand in the community. They'll be able to provide advice around our service and community outcomes. We'll be working with them to think about how we build the service models, how we build our capacity and capability to respond to harmful sexual behaviours in the community, and also what are the appropriate strategies for putting in place for building up workforce capability overall, both within this service group and outside of it, to both respond to child sexual abuse and harmful sexual behaviours.
Okay, back to me. So by now you will have got the sense that we're approaching this in a very coordinated way. I'm also hoping that you've got the key message about engagement and that this is the first of many conversations. The 4 people you've just heard from are really important. They're the project leads in each of those areas. We will provide their email addresses and you can contact them at any time if you have queries or questions, and they and their teams will address those. Following this webinar, we will be launching a dedicated web page. It will be regularly updated and it will include the recording of this webinar, and we will also be able to respond to questions that we won't have time for today. And once again, I do sincerely apologise for the technical difficulties at the start of the webinar. I'd encourage you all to visit the web page, ensure you're kept up to date of progress. We will be communicating with you in various ways. There will be the design labs, there will be one-on-one meetings, there will be the web page, there will be group emails. Depending on what we hear back from you, if you like the webinar format and it works, we'll do more webinars. We're absolutely open to hearing what the best way is to communicate with you. We've also launched a dedicated mailbox. So if you have any queries, you can go to either the general email box or you can go to one of the project leads. Thanks, Nikki. Placeholders for each of the design labs mentioned this morning should have already been sent or will be sent to you imminently. I'd also like to now open the floor for questions. We have a bit of time left where we can respond to questions. The moderators tell me there have been a lot of questions in the out-of-home care space, and so we will have to respond to some of those outside of this session, and we'll do that through the web pages or getting back to people directly. There's about 160 people in the event, so we do need to moderate the questions, and that's a way that we can reduce duplication. And if you feel your questions haven't been answered, either after the session or after we publish on the website and respond to the emails, please do reach out and let us know. All right, how are we going to do the questions?
I'm going to read them out.
Okay.
We've got a list here of who we think should answer them, but if that's wrong, then...
All right. So that's the voice of Nikki Coslin and Bev Jow, who are moderating the questions, and they're going to read those out, and then one of the panel members will respond to them. Thanks, Nikki.
So the first question is for Elaine or Michael. Is the agency commissioning plan a public document and will it be shared with the community sector?
It is still in draft at the moment, but the intention is absolutely it will be a public document. So we're just working out timings for when that will be public. As I say, we'll have some conversations with the communities roundtable about when that will go out, but we're hoping it will be relatively soon.
And another quite simple one, I think, for Mark. Mike Rowe referenced the out-of-home care roadmap 2019 to 2023. Where is this document located to view?
We can certainly send that out if it's not on the website, and I can't remember off the top of my head if it is, so we can certainly share that.
Or we can add it to that website.
Yeah, great, thank you.
Right. This one may be for Michael. Sustainable funding models will need to include external factors such as ERO increased wages. Currently, the state government have only committed to 1 year of ERO funding. Will these variables be considered and included when considering a sustainable model of funding for CSOs?
Yes, so the intention is for the funding model to incorporate all the costs of operations going forward, and so we'll be making submissions on the sector's behalf to Treasury to incorporate those sorts of payments going forward.
For Karen Webb, will the FDB outcomes framework be aligned to the state outcomes framework?
Yes.
Absolutely. All of the outcomes work will align with the state outcomes framework, and that's absolutely our intention.
Mark, the budget papers reported amazing outcomes for intensive family support services, but no new money. Where does early intervention fit into the reform roadmap?
Obviously, early intervention for us is part of a whole of system child protection reform, and work is underway concurrently around the intensive family support strategy and the services that are procured as part of that. And so that's a piece of work that will come into line with the work that we are doing, as well as a whole of system commissioning.
A question for Chad. How will ACCOs take part in the Southwest trial if there are no new contracts or providers? Do they need to partner with existing mainstream services? If so, how do they transition to community control?
That's a very good question. I think what we're looking at in the Southwest trial is to have ACCOs involved in all those discussions and all the design labs. And we have done some mapping work around the number of ACCOs in the Southwest who have touch points to the Southwest. So they'll be involved in those discussions. It's not easy when you're looking at supporting existing services, but then trying to grow the footprint of ACCOs. So we'll also have some discretion there to look outside the box when it comes to funding of ACCOs. We are, as a department, looking at releasing an ACCO strategy, which will look at some of those sometimes difficult questions around partnering with an Aboriginal community controlled organisation, Aboriginal community controlled organisations versus Aboriginal businesses, and how we ensure that that's done in a fair and transparent way, so we don't end up with some situations where an Aboriginal community organisation doesn't actually get to the point where they've built capacity and take on that contract. But we'll put some more information around our ACCO strategy and how that links in on the website when that's available.
And another question that's linked, will homelessness service providers not currently funded by communities be able to join the co-design process in the Southwest?
Yes, we're just trying to work out how that will happen. Initially, it will be for those services who are currently funded by the department, as well as ACCOs, because that is a core a principle of our approach moving forward with commissioning. But towards next year, and again, these design labs are only the first of many design labs, but we'll be looking at over the next 2 years how the whole ecosystem of services in the Southwest evolves.
The next question could be from a number of you. How different do you anticipate the 4 commissioning plans to be? Does this create unnecessary complexity?
Well, that's a very good question, and it's the very reason why we're working together in a collaborative, joined-up approach, because we absolutely don't want to create unnecessary complexity. So I think those will be some of the issues that we'll deal with during the design labs. Elaine and Mac might want to add to it, but my thinking is wherever possible, we'll have template documents or shell documents that transfer across all of them. Clearly, we're talking here, as Elaine mentioned, about different sorts of commissioning approaches in each area. And we absolutely want to use this as an opportunity to cut down on administrative burden and unnecessary reporting to the sector. Did you want to add anything to that?
Just to reinforce that one of the things we do need to look at about what's practical and achievable, and we certainly wouldn't want to be taking the exact same cookie cutter approach for every type of service that we have, because one, we probably couldn't deal with the administrative burden, and I don't think the sector could either.
Yeah.
So it's a bit about what can we practically achieve, and that's why it's going to take us a little while to work through to get to a full commissioning approach. Will take a few years, but we need to make whatever changes we can as soon as we can. And even if we do have some contracts that we roll over, we'll be looking to see how we can make improvements in the meantime. So it won't be just exactly the same as you have just now. But we will have conversations about how we can make improvements and do some more innovation as part of that process.
And I'm not sure if that's answered your question, but if it hasn't, you now know email addresses which you can contact. So you can either phone or email us and clarify that we didn't quite get to the point of your question, and then we can provide additional information. And that goes for everybody who's asking questions today.
And a question for Nicole. How will the CSAT outcomes development align to the WA State Outcomes Framework?
Good question. It will be aligned. I probably can't tell you how it will be aligned at this point, but that's something that we'll take up with our services through the design lab process, but we'll also be consulting with stakeholders like WACOS along the way, and anybody else who really needs to be involved.
Okay, we've got time for 2 more questions, and I appreciate again that us starting a bit late has narrowed that. It is the first of many such conversations, and we will also publish the other questions on the website with our answers. If you've got a burning question that can't wait for us to do that, then please do email or call one of us directly. So 2 more questions.
This is for whoever wants to answer it. How will you ensure ACCOs are engaged and leading this process, given the Aboriginal community is the mainstream in out-of-home care, etc.?
Well, I think particularly from an out-of-home care perspective, and I mentioned before this, the significant role that Aboriginal community-controlled organisations not only play in the system design, but this delivery of services moving forward. And so they play a large role across all of our service delivery areas in ensuring that their voices are heard, and also that we continue on and continue to capture a lot of that work that's already been done with the Aboriginal community controlled sector previously in the way that we move this forward.
Did anybody else want to comment on
Does
that?
anybody else want to add anything to that?
I just think as well, again, with the ACCO strategy and obviously with the Aboriginal Outcomes Division within the department, who we've been working with very closely, and I know have run a series of workshops which have also focused on commissioning. We're very much trying to align our work so that we are, as a department, we are focusing on those broader closing the gap priorities, which is looking at building the capacity and the footprint of Aboriginal community controlled organisations. So it is front of mind.
The last question, what plans are there for collaborative departmental approaches to solutions and funding, for instance, between Department of Communities and the Department of Justice? But there are many possibilities.
Right. That's a really great question. I think the Director General touched on that. I know that some of those agencies that we work closely with are part of this webinar today. And Matt, do you want to talk to that a little bit more about some of the work we're doing with our partners at Justice, Police, Mental Health Commission, Health, talking to them about their commissioning and where possible looking for synergies?
Yeah, so I think Elaine has been working a lot with the other agencies to look at, okay, how does their commissioning plan line up with our commissioning plan? We tend to be potentially on time, a little bit ahead, but generally speaking, we're trying to line up where there's synergy between services, how we might, combine service together, provide joint outcomes to the wider community. So it's definitely front of mind. It's definitely something we're going to be working on a lot harder. The National Design Labs will start to pull out some of the synergies where you might get funding from 2 different agencies for similar outcomes, and we'll try to work through how we can get the commonality between the services and the outcomes that both agencies require.
And one of the things we might look at is whether we can do some trials or pilots, or how can we, again, look at something that's practical and see how we learn some lessons from that delivery and then roll things out. So there'll be a real piece of work on that going forward.
Okay, thanks, Elaine. In closing, I want to genuinely thank the Peaks. I won't start mentioning you all because I'll miss someone, but you have been by our side and you have helped us to be better. And I want to thank each of you and your staff who've been involved in helping us get ready and to progress this body of work. Thank you again, everyone, for your questions and your comments. We do need to leave it there because of the time constraints. Questions that weren't answered today will be answered by the project team and they will be published on the website. If you've got a question that you don't want published on the website and you want to just send it directly, that might be something about your particular contract, then of course you should speak with your contract manager or one of the project leads. If you feel that your questions have not been answered by today's webinar and you don't know the next steps, please reach out, give someone a call, email someone directly, and we will address your concerns. I hope I've made it really, really clear that this is the beginning of conversations with you. Give us feedback. How did today go? Was it useful? It was not useful. What more would you want covered? Let us know if you want more webinars or you're happy to take it to the design lab process now. This is genuinely a two-way conversation. So as we go into this beautiful long weekend in Perth, I wish you all well. I thank you for your time today and your patience with us at the beginning. And I'd like to thank all of my co-presenters, my colleagues here in Communities, and those behind the scenes that you can't see who've helped us and have stayed calm while one of us may have been panicking slightly. Thank you all again, and we'll talk with you again soon. Take care.